as an independent filmmaker, I want to know, is there hope for me? Like, what trends are you seeing that will make me want to continue to make these $1 million movies?
This is Truly Independent, a show that demystifies the indie film journey by documenting the process of releasing independent films in theaters. Each week, Garrett Batty and I, Daren Smith, will update you on our journey, bringing guests to share their insights into the process and answer your questions. All right, Garrett. Hey, man. How's it going?
Hey, good to see you, Daren. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm great because we have a guest today. I'm so excited. I met Jon Fitzgerald on LinkedIn, of all places. You're probably surprised to hear me say that, right?
Darren, you've become an ambassador for LinkedIn, and
I
I
have.
love it. And the
I have.
podcast is better for it.
I should get a
hope
share.
you're getting an affiliate split.
I know.
Right.
Every time I mention it, I should get a share, another share of LinkedIn stock. But Jon, welcome to the show. You're on Truly Independent. Hey.
Happy to be here.
The crowd goes wild. Let me give the listeners a little bit of context here. So, Jon, you are a producer. You're an author. You're a co-founder of the Slamdance Film Festival. You wear a lot of hats. You've done development and acquisitions, and you've worked at studios, with studios, for studios. I mean, it seems like with your 30-year career in the industry, you've kind of seen it all. And over the last 10 years, you've done a lot of writing and a lot of curating, helping people figure out what to watch. And so we're just so excited to have you on because we want to talk about basically all those things. Does that sound okay?
Yeah.
Sounds great.
How much time do you have, John? We'll be here for a couple of hours.
Yeah, I was thinking this might be a 4-hour podcast.
You know, someday we'll do that. We'll do the Tim Ferriss, like 3.5 hours and unedited. And we'll do it when you run for president. How about that?
Well, you know, I've done this enough to know how to give you sound bites, and we'll be able to nail this in less than an hour.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, well, even just reading through your bio and hearing Daren talk about you, I became an instant fan. Having grown up in Park City and watched the Slamdance Film Festival just grow and just get to be what it is has been very, very exciting for me, just as an independent filmmaker. And so to talk with you even about that is, I'm looking forward to that. This will be a red letter date in my experience.
Awesome. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if we start there, because that's a thing to not gloss over at all. Like, you started a very well-known, very well-respected film festival. I mean, Garrett and I were there last year. We went and saw a panel with Ted Hope and loved it, and loved the community there and the atmosphere. And so maybe talk us through that, and
Sure.
With the bigger picture idea of, this is a podcast to help demystify the indie film journey for independent filmmakers. Mm-hmm. And so maybe what are some of the lessons learned from starting a festival and being so involved with the festival for a long period of time?
Sure. Yeah, I guess it's good timing since they, are coming up here after their move to LA.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think, the short version of the story is, like the other co-founders, I started as a filmmaker and we didn't get into Sundance. So we decided to basically find a way to go up and show our own film. So Slamdance was born, and the office was in my kitchen. And so I got all the calls after the festival saying, "Are you guys coming back?" And so, we decided to put, at least for myself, put my filmmaking career on hold and come back. And thankfully, Peter Baxter, who was one of the producers of one of the first year's films, came on board as a creative director, and we just, kept things moving. And if you'd asked me then if we'd be still doing this over 30 years later, I probably would have said no. But thanks to Peter and the team, they kept the ball rolling. And I think, what we learned, I mean, there's been a lot of great films that have come through there, and filmmakers like, Chris Nolan and the Russo brothers, and it's a pretty long list, but at its core, it's really just about supporting first-time filmmakers and giving them an opportunity to be discovered at the end of the day. And so if you can show more films, I mean, just like the Directors Fortnight did in Cannes, right? It's like, why not have another section taking place up there? And of course, eventually it was time to move on. But it was an amazing opportunity for me, and it taught me how to run film festivals, and it taught me the idea of discovery and how to bring these films to venues all around the world. I did festivals in Abu Dhabi, and I've supported them in Florida, and all over really. And I think what's rewarding for me is, in addition to the discovery for these independent filmmakers, it's bringing these movies to audiences, because a lot of times these films that play festivals aren't going to find a theatrical release. People aren't going to have a chance to see these on the big screen or talk to filmmakers. And I'm a big fan of the experience, and I'm sure that's something we'll talk a little bit about today. It's like, how can we create unique opportunities for these films to find perhaps a non-theatrical release in a venue, but to get people into the room, have conversations, maybe have a reception, do whatever you need to do to create an experience to get people off their couch, right? And so for years, running film festivals and to some extent consulting to filmmakers and helping them map out their journey has really become my day job, quite honestly. Is in between the filmmaking. It's how do I help these filmmakers make the right choices? Because as you guys know, there's, depending on who you ask, there's 7,500 festivals now. There were less than 1,000 when we started Slamdance.
Yeah. Well, I want to do one follow-on question there, because I think there's been a lot of discussion over the last week, because Sundance just wrapped 2 days ago, and there weren't like a huge amount of acquisitions at this festival, and that's been a talking point. And so I'm curious, as you work with and consult filmmakers that have or on their festival strategy, what are some of the common things that you're giving them as pointers, and has that even changed in the last year or two or three? Because we've, Hollywood and this industry's gone through a lot of change and a lot of turmoil in the last couple of years. So what are you kind of putting in front of people as the main things they should be thinking about with their festival strategy?
Well, and that's a great question. And I think that the single most important thing that we always kind of talk through first with our clients is, what are your goals for the film? And a lot of people are trying to sell their movie, right? And then a lot of filmmakers, especially short filmmakers, are just trying to elevate their careers. They're trying to use this as a calling card. And I think what's really important is that you understand what you're trying to achieve out of that festival run. And if selling your movie is the most important, to your point about the acquisitions out of Sundance, I think it's important to realize that most movies that are selling on the festival circuit aren't necessarily selling out of one of those primary festivals. They might get some traction, but those deals tend to come later. And even the films that aren't playing Sundance or Toronto or Telluride or what have you, what we tell them is, look, what's more important right now is that you think about how to play credible festivals. Play festivals where the laurels mean something on your press kit. The first question most acquisitions executives ask is, what festivals did you play? So it's important to play the right festivals, but a lot of these deals that kind of trickle through the year aren't necessarily happening at a film festival. It's the conversations and the follow-up with these distributors that can lead to acquisitions conversations. And the deals that were happening a few years ago, during the boom, or when Netflix and Amazon started showing up in Park City, those deals just really aren't happening anymore. I mean, yeah, Coda was a monster deal, but I mean, they're few and far between. And so if you look at the percentages, right, the percentages of the films that are even accepted at a Sundance, it's like less than 0.5% now. The more important thing is to look at the festivals that can help you achieve your goals, and then see where the acquisitions fall into place later. There's so many opportunities now to land on, iTunes or Amazon or Tubi or whatever your goals are for that film. You don't need the standard acquisitions deal to make that happen, but you have to understand how those deals are structured, and then just play the festival run and play it out.
Awesome.
So, okay, so to recap, it seems like then I could, as a filmmaker, I've made my film, maybe I don't get accepted to Sundance, but you would help me navigate which festivals to submit to, which festivals to really pay attention to, and then afterwards, how to kind of navigate these potential deals or no deals, and what to do next to still make sure that my film gets seen.
Yeah, because again, I think it's important to you start with the goals, right? Plan A is, make this film, sell it for millions of dollars to A24 or Neon, right? Or Fox Searchlight or Sony Classics. But plan B might be sell it to somebody else if I want to move on and make my next film. And then we'll talk about that later, right? What's the marketing cap? How many years they want it? That's a whole other conversation. But
Right.
what is the deal you want? Or, you know what? I've spent 3 or 4 or 5 years making this film. I'm going to stay with it, and I'm going to manage my own alternative distribution model. I'm going to put my own marketing dollars into it. I might even pay an aggregator to get it on certain platforms, hang on to the educational. So I control, you have to be a bit more entrepreneurial these days, right? If you're interested in maximizing that return and not just handing it off to somebody else. But I think it's what I was just saying is like there are films that played, Napa Valley and Santa Barbara and Mill Valley and went on to have deals. Sometimes it was a 5-figure minimum guarantee and it was released in theaters, but it doesn't always make sense like it may have before to play theatrical to still achieve your goals. So I think it is important to kind of talk to a filmmaker and find out, okay, what are your goals? And do I need to play that many screens? Is it more about generating the revenue, or is it about getting it to the right home so I can move on and do other things?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I love it. Well, maybe that's a good transition into, there was this post that you shared a few months ago that I saw on LinkedIn and was just like, man, we got to talk to this guy. You wrote a post about hybrid distribution, and it's really kind of a great overview of, what do you do if your goal isn't theatrical or going to a festival, like what other opportunities are there? So I'd love to have you kind of talk through the kind of your main points from that thing, and we
Sure.
could talk about it because we're right in the middle of that now with, Faith of Angels. We've got it on
Mhm.
some streaming platforms, but we still have a lot of other opportunities to exploit, I think. So it'd be
Mhm.
fun to talk through, I think.
Yeah, well, I think that, the sad reality of we call it the new landscape, I guess, is that anybody can get their movie into a theater. You can four-wall a theater if, playing it on the silver screen is your dream. But if nobody's going to come, or your movie's going to play in a theater 3 or 4 times a day for a week and compete with studio movies that are also struggling, it just doesn't always make sense. For the most part, it doesn't make sense. So there are companies like Kinema and Gather that have really kind of zeroed in on how to work with filmmakers to play the number of theaters they want to play, the way they want to play them. It can be a advanced booking where the theater is rented. It can also be a booking that is done, and based on the number of seats you sell, it's tipped for a screening, and it happens. But they can handle the ticketing. They can help you with how to create the champion scenario where you get people promoting it in these different regions. They use a company called Artini to help distribute, whether it's the DCPs or the DVDs or whatever it is, community screenings in theaters, in schools. So these are opportunities that I think filmmakers need to lean into. And it doesn't work for every film, but there's also filmmakers that are taking their film on tour and going to different places and having different stops. And again, it comes down to what your goals are and how much time you want to spend. But if you look at the movies that are going to these platforms and having alternative distribution, you can actually make more money that route than you're going to make hanging out on Tubi or any number of the Roku channel. I mean, great, AVOD's doing well with some films, but there's thousands of titles there. How are you going to create attention for your title? People always want to tell mom and dad that I'm on iTunes. Oh, great! If there's over 100,000 titles there, how are people going to find your movie besides the people you direct link to? So you have to have marketing as part of your conversation. But the other thing that if you don't go with Gather or one of these other alternative distribution plays, people are aggregating now, which means you go to a company and you pay them a fee, and then they place you on these channels. But again, it's a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, they're not taking your film for 5 or 10 or 15 years, which is great, right? You hold on to your rights. But by just getting the movie on those platforms, it's not going to help you unless you have a marketing strategy to support it and drive eyeballs to it. So again, it's the plan A, plan B, and sometimes it's the plan C. There's a ton of opportunity now, especially in the social impact space, to go into educational, go into schools,
Yeah. And it seems like you would design a plan just based on the specific film, right? There is
Mhm.
no turnkey solution where you say, do this. If you're an independent filmmaker, here's how to do it. And that's why
There
you
is no
really,
one
really
way.
thought. Yeah.
That article you refer to, I think, some of those companies are companies that can put your film onto screens into theaters. We talked about Kinema and Gather. Others are like Binge. I mean, you could pay whatever 10 grand or whatever their fees are, and they'll get you on 20, 30, 50, sometimes even 100 platforms, but you're paying for the privilege to have them do that work. They're essentially giving you access to their platform, and then they're sub-distributing to other platforms. And so there's a value to that if you have that kind of money to spend and you want to kind of hand it off. But the other cool thing is it's a shorter term deal, right? You're not handing it to Gravitas for 10 years or something, right? So it is important to kind of understand the term. I made the mistake, right? 15 years ago, I sold my movie to Magnolia, and they've had it for 15 years.
Hmm.
That was a monumental mistake that I learned from. So now one of the first questions when I talk to a filmmaker, it says, I just got this offer. I say, send me the agreement. Let me look at the terms, and let's make sure that, they're not trying to tie you up, or that they're going to have unlimited marketing spend, right? Because
Yeah.
I mean, again, there are some honest people in this business, but let's face it, the sales agents and the distributors in these international markets aren't always the straightest of shooters, right? And so they have a super creative accounting program, and they always find a way to just spend a little more than it makes. Seems like to me,
Yeah.
anyway.
So what are things in an agreement? Again, Darren mentioned we've just released Faith of Angels. We're now doing streaming deals. We've got some international deals in place. What are some things that we should be looking for, or other independent films makers should be looking for in those agreements to say, hey, here's a red flag, or no, this is a good opportunity.
Well, I think that the three things that come to mind are term. You work with one of these agents, let them do what they can for a year or two. I think indie rights, Linda Nelson and Michael, those guys are great, and they've got a terrific reputation with filmmakers, and they don't tie you up for 10 years. I don't know what it is, 2, 3. It's a pretty short term thing. So think about the term if you can help it. I mean, look, if Netflix or HBO or Apple or one of these big companies wants to throw down real money and take it for a longer period, and you're okay with that, then that's fine. But the problem is a lot of these smaller, like what I call bottom feeders, there's dozens of them out there. They're trying to take the film for as long as they can. And so the term is first. The second thing is, again, look at the marketing spend. Make sure there's a cap. If they're going to release it in some theaters, nobody's going to come if they don't spend a little bit of money, 5 or 10 grand a market maybe, but they need to spend something to get cheeks and seats. But you don't want to have unlimited, because again, they'll get creative with the accounting, some of these folks.
Yeah.
And then the third thing is just make sure that there's tracking, that you can understand what's going on. Some of these folks will tie your film up, but they don't have a strong reporting. You want to know what's going on at all times, you know?
Yeah.
Don't have to call them. I mean, even Magnolia, I mean, with all due respect, I mean, they have one of my films, but sometimes I have to follow up with them to get my quarterly report, and it comes way late. So I think that's important to understand the reporting structure. And then the last thing is just understand the deliverables, because this has changed a lot over the years, right? It used to be like, how are you going to blow up my movie? And what are the errors and omissions, and what are chain of title? There's a lot of things in that deliverables bucket that filmmakers don't really understand. And they get so excited that there's an offer on the table, but then they realize that, oh my God, there's a ton of work I have to do, and it's going to cost me a lot of money that I didn't even budget for.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
understand the deliverables. So those are, a few things to think about.
Well, shout out to
That's
our
amazing.
last week's episode. If you haven't heard the deliverables episode, listener, please go back and listen to that, because that we did 10 deliverables, 10 basic things that you have to
Cool.
be aware of, and E&O and everything. Yeah, all of those. That's the phase we're in right
Yeah.
now.
That was
Some
awesome.
distributors won't even work with you. You know, if you want, they pass over the deliverables list, and you say, "What's this?"
Hmm.
That's kind of a sign to say, "Okay, well, maybe we're not ready. You know, we don't have
Yeah.
a mutual agreement there."
What's interesting about what you're talking about here is I've seen this probably half a dozen times in the last 6 months where there's a producer or an executive producer who has come out online and said, that's it. I'm never doing typical distribution again. I'm just going to self distribute all my movies because they find like what you're talking about here with these different platforms that like you can literally just do it yourself. And the platforms exist. They cost less than the fees you would pay to a sales agent or an aggregator. And they're just saying, well, if they can do it, I can do it. And I've got the money already. Why give it to them? Why not just put it into marketing? And then all of a sudden they've got 25 or 50 grand to market their movie and they see really, really good results doing it this way. And I think if you pair that with a theatrical thing, that's a great way to get awareness for your movie because it's in theaters and people are naturally talking about what's in theaters each week and
Hmm.
seeing what's in theaters. I mean, when we had Faith of Angels in, I'd pull the audience just very informally on the way in or the way out, say, hey, how'd you hear about the movie? And half the people there would say, well, it was on the app. Like I pulled it up and there it was. And it looked like a good faith based movie. So we bought tickets because they see a
Hmm.
movie every week and they only kind of like the PG 13,
Hmm.
uplifting movies. And that's what they see. It's
Right.
like, okay, cool. Like that makes sense. And then to pair that with, kind of, we self distributed these two movies essentially in
Mm,
theaters. And
that's
to
great.
continue that idea into the post theatrical is really enticing to say, look, who's going to have a better interest for the movie than Garrett? Like there's no one else. So why
Right.
not have him continue running the play and coming up with the strategy and continually going and going. So to hear that there's other options available is always exciting to me.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's as you said earlier, just looking into these new pipelines and alternative distribution, I think is really where it's at. It's just, again, it's a question of how much time you have, how much money you have. But I think anytime you can hang on to your rights as long as you can and get creative with it. And there are other people besides me. Peter Broderick is certainly an amazing champion for independent film. Keith Ochwat's doing great things. So it's just a question of finding the right person. I used to work with Jeff Dowd many years ago, and I remember him saying to me, Michael Jordan didn't, win all those championships by himself. He had a team, and I think sometimes people tend to think that they need to do everything. And what I've learned is there are people that have great skill sets. So find the right people that can help you reach those goals, and whether it's one person or two people. And don't hire your editor to do your trailer. Don't let your best friend who's a graphic designer do your poster. Like, there are people that are trained professionals to make trailers, and they're usually better than your standard editors because they have a marketing sense, right? And you can inexpensively hire a designer at Fiverr for 20, 30, $40 who's a designer to make your poster rather than trying to just grab a good still and throw in a title treatment on it. So I think it's good to have a team, but it's also good to, have different layers of goals, right? Because again, some people have investors to pay back. So they have to think about how much money can I make? And if I'm going to spend $10 or $20,000 on this thing, then I need to certainly make sure that it's going to give me exponential growth on the back end, which you're not going to get if you go with one of those bottom feeders. You'll probably never see a dime.
Yeah.
And even if
Is
they give you a
there
few grand, they're probably never going to give you any more.
Yeah,
Yeah,
a
yeah.
quick question. Is there a point in your spend on a movie where this strategy kind of falls apart? Like if you were to spend 1 million on a movie or $4 or $5 million on a movie, does this strategy still apply where you can recoup and make your money back using this kind of hybrid distribution strategy? Or is it really exclusively for, the self-financed sub couple $100,000 budget movies?
I think it really depends on what those numbers look like. I mean, if you look at Bob Burney and some of the work he's done over the years with some of his titles, some of these huge movies that people don't even realize were kind of in a way alternative distribution, like four walling and self booking, and like My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I mean, there's a bunch of movies that made a ton of money, but they weren't acquired by a major and booked into X number of theaters. There was a very careful strategy that went into some of these titles, but they did have to spend a lot of money to do it. But then there are other ones that don't spend a lot of money that will test the market and see how it does, and then go a little bit wider. And so I think it's too complicated to say, should I spend $3,000 or $300,000? Most independent filmmakers aren't in that category of being able to spend more than six figures on releasing their film. I think it's more important to look at, where is my audience going to be? If it's a church thing, a faith-based thing, and you can play in churches across the country, or if there's a whole education spin and you can book it into high schools or college campuses, right? If it's something that kind of leans into yoga, can you play in yoga studios across the country? It's like, what is the theme? What is the niche? And how big is it? And what does that community look like? But more often than not, unless you're making a bigger movie, in which case we're probably not having this conversation anyway, because it's a big action picture, an event release that a studio can justify putting millions behind. You hear it all the time now, right? Should I go pay money to see that in a theater, or should I just wait for streaming?
Yeah.
So most of the movies we're talking about, yeah, it'd be great to see it on the big screen with the lights off and the great sound and all that. But the truth is, a lot of these movies, especially docs, people are just going to wait and see them in their own creative way. But like with Gather and Kinema, like some of these platforms, you can do virtual events, you can do Q&As, and you can charge for screenings, and you can sell products. So there's a lot of opportunity there. You just kind of got to know what your budget is and what your spend is, and then that will help dictate what the revenue projections could be. So if you have to raise $5 million to pay your investors back, then you got to kind of have a bigger plan. It's not just bicycling across the country making 1,000 here, 1,000 there.
Yeah. Thanks for humoring me with that question.
So
Garrett, you had a couple questions lined up, I think.
Well, yeah. And I wanted to find out, again, I'm going over this article and I can't recommend it enough. These 10 options for hybrid distribution, and you want to look at that.
Yeah, the On the Circuit Substack, which we can put in your show notes. I mean,
Yeah,
I think
we'll do that.
something like 75,000 people are getting that now. But it's, Substack has become a thing, and this On the Circuit, it's kind of part blog, part podcast. I do top 10 lists every once in a while, and I do have a podcast. But I think, the idea is to just try and give resources to filmmakers as much as we can.
Yeah. Okay, so there's two different kind of questions, and we can decide which way we want to do this. One, as an independent filmmaker, I want to know, is there hope for me? Like, what trends are you seeing that will make me want to continue to do this? Because to continue to make these $1 million movies and then see the market change so quickly, honestly, it's hard to put together a business plan that I can take to an investor and say, here's $1 million, and then we're going to spend 500,000 to market it, and here's how we recoup, because that all changes so quickly. So I'd love to get your take on what trends you're seeing that can still instill some sliver of hope in the independent film market. And then also, and maybe this is the same segue into film investors. You've written a book, or you write up a lot about film being a tool for engagement of change, or influencing social relevant issues, and some investors are drawn to that more than perhaps the recoupability, or it makes it more worth it. So those are two topics I still want to discuss.
Yeah, I mean, those are both great ideas. I'll tackle the first one first, and then I'll kind of shift into the social impact piece. But I think, if you were to decide, for example, where to put your energy around making an independent film today, and how to pull it off, I think there's kind of, in my opinion, in the independent space, there's basically two buckets. The first is, what is the cheapest I can make this film for? There are so many tools now, it's mind-boggling in terms of the cameras and the post-production and the green screen. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, people are making movies. Noam Kroll has some great articles. You should recommend him to your readers. I mean, you can, 5,000, 10,000, whatever. I mean, you can make movies for next to nothing. So I do think pricing it as low as you possibly can, writing a script, like don't try and write a big sci-fi with tons of big effects and tons of locations if you want to make it for less than 100 grand. So think about, as an independent filmmaker, if you're trying to just kind of work on your craft and keep working and try and elevate your career and be noticed, come up with innovative stories and make it for a price. And so you can do it for less than 100 grand. And it's not that hard to raise 100 grand these days with crowdfunding, getting creative with sales, whether it's, writing a book, whether it's having an auction, having fundraisers, cobble together as many creative ideas as you can to raise some funds. And then you can probably make your money back and you can probably make a sale. And so there's that kind of innovative, low budget camp, right? Where you're probably going to make your money back. Then there's the kind of the next version, which is, I think, the one that is more apt to secure distribution on the international sales side, where you might spend $1 million. You might have to go, and have a LLC created and sell shares in the movie. There's equity crowdfunding now, which you can raise, substantial funds because people, instead of just getting a free poster, they get a piece of the movie. So there's this whole equity crowdfunding thing that's working. But then to make that kind of an investment, more often than not, you're going to have some cast that's recognizable. Is it a film that will travel? Is it a film that will do well overseas, or is it a local thing? But those are the two bigger buckets. But I do think, to your first point, should I be excited? Should I be enthusiastic? Are there opportunities? I think there's huge opportunities. Okay. I just think you have to have the right team to help to execute something really, really well so it stands out. I mean, Sundance had 17,000 plus submissions. Yeah. And I'm not saying you should do everything for Sundance. I'm saying as a kind of a symbol of how many movies are getting made now. How do you stand out? Well, find a creative way to tell that story for as little as possible, and you'll stand out. Hire the right people to help you get on people's radar, right? You need to be seen. Don't get lost. And then you'll make some money back. The $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, I think that's a tougher play, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But people are doing it. On the social impact side, this is kind of where I was leaning into with Filmmaking for Change, the book I wrote, and this handful of documentaries I've made. There's always some social relevance to them. Sometimes they're more educational than not. But at the end of the day, I feel like we owe ourselves the opportunity to, if we're going to use this massive tool for communication, try to leverage the power of film to create change. That's really what it's about. And in my opinion, there's actually more opportunities for revenue and creating screening and community screenings, creating curriculum, toolkits, discussion guides, whether you want to talk about Food Inc., Forks Over Knives, or you want to kind of lean into the climate change. There's so many different categories, and you can see like where the audiences are in these categories. And these movies can make money through the schools and through the education, whether it's you're licensing them yourself, or you're going through Canopy or one of the distributors that's doing that. There's a handful of those out there. So I think that's a great opportunity if you have a movie that's not a genre picture, right? That has something to say and that can actually move the needle in whatever category you're looking at. I think that's a great sandbox to play in. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I love that. And I think that that's one of the things that's enabled us to make these faith-based films is, we lean into mission-driven investors that are willing to take that risk and enjoy that experience and in their help in getting their message out to audiences.
Yeah, and to be honest, I mean, it may seem obvious, but there are hundreds of, usually in the bigger kind of macro categories, of social impact that have these nonprofits and NGOs and organizations that have memberships and want to get the word out and want content to get to these people, right? So you're educating, but you're also preaching to the choir if there's a built-in audience for them. So there is a world where you have a built-in community for these types of films. And I just think, you can also look to sponsorship opportunities, right? There are organizations now that have these divisions that are looking to support sustainability, for example.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can get sponsors, and that's a great way to raise some funds.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. Well, you've restored hope. So thank you. I'll keep going. We'll last another week, Daren.
Good. Man, I don't want to be worried about your future career and every time we hop on a podcast. But Jon, I think you've highlighted something that it's just highlighting this shift that's occurred in the last couple of years of filmmakers really just need to take responsibility for everything. It's kind of gone are the days of I'm just going to make the movie and then it's someone else's job to make it profitable, right? We have to be thinking about that from the very get-go. What's the outcome? How are we going to distribute this? How are we going to make the money back? Is it something we're looking to make money back, or is this not a vanity project, but something where we're not concerned about that in the same way?
Yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, the question is like, are you making this because there's some artistic vision that you just need to bring to the world, but you don't care about the money? And you manage to scrape together enough to do it. And there's probably a streaming channel out there somewhere that will support your vision. But if you're looking to make money, then you need to know who the audience is and how big is that audience. You can't just say, I'm going to make a broad comedy with no talent and think that it's going to reach people, right? You got to think about the audience first now.
Yeah, it's so true. And realizing that there's a big difference between an audience that pays $10 to see a movie in theaters and an audience that watches you for free by flicking their thumb on their phone screen every day. And sometimes those don't translate. Well, amazing. I think you've been very generous with your time. I've got some notes that I'm taking. I definitely want to recommend that everybody check out the writing that you're doing because it's super important. I've been trying to just collect a lot of people who are writing about film and independent film, especially because these are the things we want other filmmakers to know about. It's like, yes, there's still opportunity. Yes, there's lots of ways that you can get this outcome, but you might just need to think about it in a non-traditional sense. Like the way that things used to be done by making a movie, taking it to a festival and selling it, it's not as clear path anymore. And so we need to be thinking outside that box.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point, I think you need to, back to one, right? It's like, okay, if I'm going to leverage the opportunity to play festivals, to expand my network, elevate my career, potentially sell my movie, or at least generate some credibility with these laurels, how do I do that the right way? And I think it really is important to lean into the festival circuit to kind of jumpstart all of those pieces. But then it's understanding that there are plenty of opportunities to maximize your distribution. Regardless of how much money you might make, there's a path. You just have to find the right path for your film.
Yeah. I like that shift in thinking of it more as a starting line than a finish line for your film. That's cool. Garrett, any other last questions before we let Jon go? This has been awesome.
Jon, you've been wonderful to talk with. Thank you very much for spending some time with us. I'm thrilled with what you've shared. Thank you.
Of course. Well, I'm here, and I love what you guys are doing, and just spreading the news and sharing the information with independent filmmakers is what it's all about. I do have a website that's got a lot of resources on it, causepictures.com. And the On the Circuit Substack, I urge people to check that out. I'm always available to talk to filmmakers. I think it's, you gotta go where the experience is to try and get that leg up.
Amazing. That was my last question, is where can people find you? So and obviously find them on LinkedIn, because you never know. You never know how you can connect with people. Jon, thank you. This has been amazing. I'm looking forward to chatting with you again in the future. I'm sure there's going to be opportunities to pick your brain and to share other things that we're working on. And so thanks for being generous with your time today and coming on.
I've enjoyed it. You guys are great. Keep up the good work. And we'll keep in touch.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Jon. Oh, man. I like that guy. Jon's cool.
What a great resource. I mean, there's 30 plus years experience in independent film right there.
Yeah. And I mean, part of it was self-serving because, I know this guy does a lot of consulting for filmmakers, and you look at the films that he's helped out on, you're like, oh, he's a person the industry goes to for strategy stuff. So that's one of the great things about having a podcast is you can just invite consultants on and ask them all the questions, and just cost you an hour of your time. But
And
yeah,
I would put
he's
this
great.
out there. Would put this out there too, Darren, for anybody that's listening. It doesn't take a podcast to be able to make that call, and say, "Hey, I'm an independent filmmaker. I'd love to chat with you for a little bit about what you're doing." I mean,
Yeah,
as a consultant, he's going to take that call.
yeah,
Um,
very, very true.
and yeah, but great guest. Thank you very much for inviting him.
Oh yeah,
Darren, I wanted to follow up with you. We've had your pitch meeting summit.
yeah.
We've had
Pitch
your
Summit.
summit, and I wanted to find out what your takeaway was. How'd it go?
Yeah, man, what a night. Like that exceeded my expectations for sure. We had about 55, 60 people circle through. And when I counted at like the peak of the night, there was 55 people there, but I know there were a handful that came and went that I didn't even get to say hi to. It was funny because he mentioned Kinema, and Christy, who's the CEO of Kinema, was at the event, but she left before I got a chance to say hi, which was sad. But yeah, we had some amazing people, some industry people, some investors, some tech people, some filmmakers, all in the same room. And I said this earlier in the conversation with Jon, but like the takeaway for me was that was the starting line, not the finish line, right?
Mhm.
It wasn't that everything was building up and then I was going to raise 10 million in one night. I definitely have had people from that night come into the fund as investors, and so that part worked. And we've raised some money since the event. It's been about a week at this point. And really, it's I wrote a post about this last week where someone told me once the fortune is in the follow up, and I like that phrase because you really have to think of the mindset of this is the starting point, not the finish line. And now I've got 150 people that's expressed interest in attending the event. About a third of them or so came, and so that's a huge opportunity. Now I've got a hit list, so to speak, of 150 people that I can be following up with. And that's literally what I'm doing every day now is 2-3 hours every day of texting and emailing and calling and hopping on meetings and making sure that I've answered people's questions. And I'm very much driving to a yes or a no. Like I don't want to just let people hang out thinking about it for the next year. I want to know right now, how are you feeling? Are you in or out? Do you want to do this now? If not, I'm happy to come to you later. But like I'm raising now. This is the time to do it. And so I think people appreciate that kind of boldness or frankness of, no, this is the moment. Are you in or out? And a lot of people are like, oh, I didn't realize it was like right now. It's like, yeah, it's right now. Like, let's go. And they go, oh, okay. Well, let me think about it and call me in a day. And it's like, okay, great. So a lot of the work is after the event, not leading up to or during.
From an outside perspective, or from somebody who watched this event take place, my takeaway was, just 100% impressed with what you put together, the group that you invited, both the tech side and investor side and filmmaker side. I think that was a very um, encouraging group, and honestly, it restored, not that I've lost hope or faith in independent film, but it was, again, I see it as evidence that there is an interest. There is always going to be this interest in independent film, and using it as an investment or a resource or a way to tell stories or a way to influence culture. But there was an awareness to be able to get 55 people to show up for a meeting, or a summit, is no small feat. And it was really it was neat to be able to see that, and the excitement and the buzz around it. Um, and yeah, I applaud you, and I'm thrilled because that is your expertise. I think that's one of your expertise, is that networking and follow up and making sure that nothing falls through the cracks, nothing is left on the table. And I'm so excited for you to continue to do that. Well done.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it was very, very exciting. It's a ton of work. So as much as we tried to distill the process last week in the episode, it's like, it's still, it was weeks of 20 to 30 hours a week of, calling and emailing and texting and following up and putting it together and lining everything up. And it's still not done. Like, I got invoices to pay and I got people to take care of, like, it's a whole thing. So,
Well, you manage it well, and I mean that is the skill set that you have as a producer, and I'm sure it'll be fruitful for you. Um,
yeah.
it took place at Sundance, kind of the tail end at Sundance. So as far as giving a report on Sundance, I think that it was another great festival. I had the chance to go up to several events and even did a screening of a film called Omaha, which is made by a friend of ours, Cole Webley,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just an incredible, beautiful film. Both, and he'll tell you this, both heartbreaking and inspiring and very touching and poignant, and left a message of just having compassion for those that you may just see passing by you. And it was very well done. I also got to spend a lot of time with a mutual friend of ours, Kirk Rose, he's with Heartstrings Media. He came up and we went to various pitch meetings and um, talked a lot about distribution and coming up with the next project. And it was a great week of networking and kind of immersing ourselves in that independent film world.
Yeah, there was a lot going on. It was not only Sundance, but then after the first weekend was Utah Tech Week, and so we overlapped both of those with my event. I think it went really well, but it was also like, man, there were 200 over 200 events with Utah Tech Week, and I think a lot of the people that I invited from the tech side or the Utah infrastructure side ended up going to other events or decided not to come up to Park City for that, which was a bummer. But the follow-up's been great, and so they're like, hey, I was really sad to miss it. My wife was kind enough to record both our kind of panel discussion and my pitch to the room, and so I've got that asset that I've been using heavily. And my dad's passing it around, and other investors that were there are passing it around to people that they wish they had invited or wished had attended. So it's continually working. It's making the rounds now, which is fun. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out. It's a lot of keep going, and the finish line is somewhere in the future. I don't know when or where, but it's out there and I'll get there. I just don't know when, and that's fine.
You have created an awareness and broadened that. Again, it's about building your audience, and you are doing just that.
Yeah, thank
We
you.
got we got a few minutes. Let's
Few
just touch
minutes.
on
Let's
box
do it.
office, and it looks like Dogman and Companion both came out this weekend. As far as the studio releases, the big wide releases. Um, Independently, what are we at in that top 10? Looks like the independent film that came out on 200 screens is Creation of the Gods 2, Demon Force from Well
Yep.
Go USA.
I don't know anything about this one. And then you've got Valiant One, which is came out on 1,200 screens from Briarcliff Entertainment. Um, yeah, I don't know. I haven't seen anything. Uh, Tensions between North and South Korea. So yeah, but you've got two in there. It's another one of these. The number 10 slot was a 1.6 million weekend, because the Dogman, even though it crossed 36 million for the weekend, still fairly low, and the weekend as a whole fairly low. It was like 72 million this weekend. And so it's funny to watch the Mufasa and Sonic the Hedgehog continue to battle it out. They're at 229.6 million and 230.5 million.
Yeah,
So, and it seems like now, I mean, there's still two of the biggest movies in theaters. Sonic's still playing on 2,600. Mufasa's playing on 3,100 screens. I mean, these are still big releases, and they're in their 7th weeks. Like, that's a
yeah.
lot of screens. It just shows that not really any other big movies have come out since Christmas.
And I'll
Um,
mention too, Moana 2 is 10 weeks out, and it's
yeah.
just behind Sonic. I mean, that's amazing that Moana 2 is still performing.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, John mentioned the Oscar bump, the Academy Awards season,
Yeah.
awards season bump, which is neat to see. I mean, you have these nominations that have been announced. Golden Globes have taken place, different award shows, the Gotham, the Critics, and the SAG and BAFTAs and all those are taking place now in the next several weeks, and we're seeing these films like The Brutalist and A Complete Unknown, um, Wicked even,
Yeah, and then you go
receiving
down into your
increase.
25th through 30th, you've got Flow and Honora and The Substance and Conclave. Like, I've been trying to pick through these. I watched Substance and Conclave on streaming, but Flow, I went yesterday with my now 14-year-old for his birthday, and we watched Flow in theaters. We had to drive about 40 minutes to get there, but that's okay. Like, it
Where'd you
was,
see it? Did you see it up at the Broadway?
no, we saw it at the Cinemark in West Valley City, or
Okay.
Jordan Landing, or wherever it was. Jordan Landing. And it was great. It's such a good movie.
Yeah.
And man, I was like, that was awesome. It was
Yeah. Check
really
out
well done.
Flow. We watched it on a screener, and I put it on as, I had 15 minutes. I'm like, oh, let's put this show on. Let's kind of check it out, see if it catches me. My 18-year-old daughter was at home, and we sat and watched the entire thing. It was just so beautiful.
Yeah,
Well done.
really well done. So I love that season too. Like, it's always, I always just like looking at what are the nominees for Best Picture and let me watch those movies. Like, it feels like something we should be doing as producers. Like, if you're not watching the best movies that were produced last year, what are you doing? Like, that's kind of my take.
It's definitely an important part of the research and study, and say, hey, what are audiences responding to, and is that a space that I want to play in?
Yeah. I'll have to get I'll have to join the PGA this year finally, so that I can get the screener app, because that seems like a way easier way to do it than waiting for them to hit all the different streaming platforms. But yeah, I've still got 2 or 3 that I need to see, but yeah, it was a good year for movies, despite, a barely lower box office last year. I feel like 2023 and 2024 were essentially the same amount of tickets sold, the same amount of movies that came out, same number of box office, essentially. And it's just been some great movies coming out. And I'm got some that I'm looking forward to this year. I don't think movies are going anywhere. So we're going to keep making them. We're going to keep seeing them. We're going to keep talking about them. It'll be a fun time.
Thanks to all of our listeners and commenters. We got some great comments. Somebody sent a treatment. They actually posted their treatment right in the YouTube comments. But sure appreciate you guys both sharing and listening and talking and giving us feedback on the podcast. So keep it up, and we'll continue to bring episodes to you.
Yeah. Well, and on today's episode, we probably should announce we're going to be doing a live taping of Truly Independent at the 2025 Zions Indie Film Fest. You can come and hang out with us Friday the 28th at 8:45 to 9:45 a.m. We're going to be in Show House 2. And I'm really looking forward to doing this with a live audience. I think we're going to have a cool conversation as always, but being able to take some live questions is going to be super fun. So if you're in Utah, or if you're near Utah and you want to come into town, it's a great festival that you should consider, the Sundance Film Festival. I mean, there were 10,000 people that attended last year. It's not a small festival anymore. And it's at the Sarah in Orem, Utah, and we will be there throughout the week, I'm sure, looking, watching movies and participating in panels and all those things that we tend to do. But Friday morning, February 28th, come live. We're going to record an episode of the podcast. I'm super looking forward to that.
Okay, it's a good plug, good way to end it. We'll get this episode out in time so that they can act on that. Thank you very much, Daren. Congrats on your event, and I look forward to chatting with you next week.
Thanks, man. See ya. Thank you for listening to this episode of Truly Independent. To join us on the journey, be notified, and ask us questions about today's episode, head over to 3coinpro.com/podcast and put in your name and an email address. If you're a fan of the show, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast app and be sure to share this. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week. Our intro and outro music is Election Time by Kjartan Abel.